we're heading maybe 3 years ago now. And the point of it was the point of it is to connect researchers across academia and civil society in respect of social security system in the north and south of Ireland. And it was a few months ago that I met Karen at another event at our Ulster campus in Coleraine, and she was bringing me up to speed with their research on the defective concrete crisis, and more specifically, the financial aspects of the crisis, particularly for example, children and young people. So we're really delighted to have both Professor Karen Kirby and Oisin Keenan with us today, who are both researchers in the School of Psychology at Ulster University and who have been carrying out extensive work around the defective concrete crisis, particularly in Donegal. And I am going to let them both introduce themselves and say a wee bit more about their work. Obviously, this is quite I suppose, specific area that the All Ireland Social Security Network are hosting an event on today, but we really just want to raise awareness of the financial impacts that these kind of eco-crises can have on individuals and communities. So I am going to pass over to both Karen and Oisin now for their presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Karen Kirby. Again, thank you, Kira, for introducing me there. So I'm really happy to be able to present some of our research that we have been working on. And Oisin Keenan here is our PhD researcher that's been working on this topic for the last couple of years now, and he's writing up and trying to publish his work as he goes along. So our involvement in this has been through some of our colleagues. There are also supervisors on this project, Professor Paul Dunlop and Dr. Eileen Doherty. We've also other supervisors too. I need to name them, with Professor Jamie Murphy and another Dr. Rachel McHugh. But they asked us, I suppose we'd be approaching 3 years ago, to think about trying to carry out some research on the mental health impacts of people experiencing the defective concrete crisis. And they had, because there's so much anecdotal information and evidence on the ground from people living through it, but they needed to quantify it in some way, and they needed someone to really study it and investigate it in more depth. So we put up a PhD scholarship, and Oisin is applied, and he's here, and he's doing fantastic work with us. So I'll just let Oisin introduce himself, and then we will begin the presentation and share with you. And I suppose the presentation, the study is around the mental health impacts, but the emphasis that we're going to try and make today is how that is starting, the financial strain that is being placed upon people, how that's having its effect on the mental health, not just of people, but we're talking parents and consequently their children. And that's some of the emphasis that will be made towards the end of the presentation.
Hi everyone. Yeah, wouldn't have much else to add. Yeah, I'm doing my PhD in psychology on the mental health impact of this crisis, and yeah, like Karen said, being from the northwest, you would hear a lot of. If you talk to anyone affected, you would sort of hear the stress that this crisis can have on people. We want to like, quantify that and sort of show the impact on people because if it's studied in a journal or something, it's harder for the government to ignore how this is affecting people.
Yeah. So yes, we will get straight onto it then. So I'm going to share my slides, and I might have to go full screen because we have a video to play as well. All right. So first of all, can I just check if folks can see that? And I might have to just not share the full screen, just in slideshow format, because I want to play a wee video in the first couple of slides. Is that okay? So the title of Oisin's PhD is quite aptly, we think, titled initially as An Earthquake in Slow Motion. And people, once we get through the slides, you'll understand why this was the most appropriate title for his PhD. So it's looking at the mental health impact of the defective concrete crisis. You'll see all of the names of the supervisors that are listed at the bottom here, and I've mentioned them already. So what I'm going to talk about then is we're going to show you just some pictures. We recognize that there will be people here that are very familiar with this, but there's also in this audience today, there may be people who haven't really heard much about this. So we're going to show a small video so that people can get a sense of what we're talking about here and what it looks like. Because sometimes a visual image of things can be just as powerful as presenting a lot of statistics and research that we're going to present today. So then once we do that, we'll tell you a wee bit of the background of the study, and then we're going to present two outcomes that we have of studies that we have completed so far that Oisin has been working on really, really hard. So the first one is the mental health on adults, and the second one is looking at parents and children. And then we want to come up with some conclusions and recommendations. It is now about 8 minutes past 1. We think will take us about 25 minutes. We hope that that's okay, but we still think there'll be enough time for everyone to ask us questions. So if you just look at this image here, just for a moment, you'll see in the image, even on the top right-hand corner, this is a house that someone actually lives in, and you can see a hole directly through the building on the corner of the building. You can see lots of cracks. You can see on the left top here, someone's hand literally pulling away parts of the wall with their bare hand. The images in some ways speak directly for themselves, and the picture below is the damp that is that happens as a result of the blocks being defective. Now, just to kind of give you a sense of and we'll show you the video, the scale of this. So the scale, and I think there may be people in the audience who may maybe give me more up-to-date information, but from our understanding, this began pre-2015, and initially it was called mica. It was a mica issue, and it was referred to, there was mica campaigners, so people sat around the tables, ordinary people trying to deal with this issue, recognizing that their houses were crumbling, and they began a campaign. So over 10 years of that led to a government grant scheme, which they had was an attempt to try and deal with the issue, but it wasn't fit for purpose. And then there was a second revised government grant scheme that still got lots and lots of issues with it, and I'll explain that as we progress through the presentation. But we're talking at least 10,000 people, we believe, that are dealing with this in Donegal, but it's also stretching down to the northwest of Ireland as well, and in Limerick. So this is not necessarily just a Donegal issue. This is in Sligo, Mayo, Galway, and stretching down into Limerick that we are hearing some information from. Just to show you a little bit of this video, and I hope it plays nice and straightforward for me here. I'll ask Kira to tell me that it's playing okay.
Yes, seems to be. Maybe just no sound.
Good, great.
Sound. No sound, Karen.
Can you hear it?
No.
Can't hear it?
Can't hear it, but we can read the...
Oh, no. Right, okay. Is there something, just if Anne in the background, we'll play it anyway for a few minutes, but if Anne in the background could check that there's a little button you can click to press the audio and see if that works. Okay. Thank you.
Let me try. No, I think I'm looking at buttons that are your buttons. No, wait.
No, still no good.
No.
Okay, so I'll let it play for a minute or two.
We can read the text.
You can read the text. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm just gonna, oh, excuse me. I'm just gonna come back over. I might have to stop sharing my screen for a second so it comes back into where we were. Can I just check with Kira? Are we back on the slides?
Yep, you're back in the slides, Karen. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So look, everyone, playing that little video we thought was important to try and let people have a sense of what it is people are dealing with. And I apologize you couldn't hear the person talk, but you were able to read it. But even just seeing the visual images of the houses that people are living in, and particularly hearing one of the mothers there talking about her experience of her family having to live there, but also cracking bison slabs, and their children living in that household, and also a child who has asthma there as well. So all of these things people were experiencing on the ground. We were hearing lots of this, and this is, as I said, why we began the study. We have presented what we're about to present to you now. We have presented it in the Dáil last September. We were invited by TD Charles Ward. We've also published this first piece of research in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. Oisin is going to put the link of this paper directly into the group chat so people can click on it and open it and read it themselves. So I'm just going to proceed now quickly through our background. So you understand it's now called defective concrete crisis. It's not called a mica crisis, which was the kind of the commonly referred to name. And I'm not going to get into the reason why it's changed too much, but our colleague, Professor Paul Dunlop, has carried out extensive research, has published extensively to determine and show and demonstrate that it is not mica as the main issue. It is pyrite and iron sulfur attack. And he's had other researchers from around the world who have helped demonstrate that and evidence that. So it's called defective concrete. It's left thousands of people in Ireland living in unsafe, deteriorating homes, and often for many years. Families face ongoing exposure, as you can see here just from the video, particularly their safety risks, financial strain, displacement and uncertainty, and there's significant administrative challenges associated with trying to get on to the government grant scheme as well and proceeding through it. We suspected from what we saw that this could be similar to disaster-related trauma in terms of impact to people's lives. And we had started to dig deep into the scientific literature on other kind of humanitarian crises and found, some of the types of things that could be happening to people. So this was formed our hypothesis to begin thinking about what types of things are we going to investigate in our research. Just to say at that time, there were no studies to date that had estimated any of the prevalence rates of the mental health issues that could be experienced in this population. So we were the first to carry this out. So we wanted to quantify the mental health burden on affected adults as well as children who could be enduring this as well. We wanted to find out what were then the key predictors of the levels of distress, but ultimately we have to do something with what we find. We have to try and inform policy. We have to try and see if there's something we can do to mitigate the ongoing harm and support some kind of recovery. So that's our main aim. One of the things that we, on our initial investigating the literature when we were forming the hypothesis and deciding what kinds of things are we going to measure here, because we picked up on things like people were feeling unsafe, people were feeling like they couldn't get out of this situation, difficulties getting on the scheme, we kind of started to hypothesize and predict that maybe there was some levels of trauma potentially experienced. So people think, well, trauma, PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, what is that? And how does that differ to another type of trauma called complex PTSD? So we just to tell the audience here, because we recognize people will be not really always familiar with this, PTSD is something that's a one-off sudden event, like a car accident, a sudden issue, scary, terrifying experience. the symptoms of that can be re-experiencing it, avoidance, and maybe a sense of current threat. So if it was a car accident, for example, maybe there'll be always a fear of cars or not getting into the car or avoiding it or whatever. Complex PTSD is different, okay? It may have some of the issues of re-experiencing avoidance and sense of current threat, but there's also other ongoing issues like emotional dysregulation. Can you hear me okay? Negative belief on disturbances in their relationships. Now that's associated with prolonged distress, okay? Not a once-off, something that's happening ongoing. So we started to hypothesize that we thought people might be. We weren't sure until we carried out the research. We thought, is it possible that some people who are living through this might have some symptoms of complex PTSD? And you may think already, that just sounds quite unbelievable. I can't really understand how that could be, but we're going to present to you what we found. So the two studies, the first one is to estimate the prevalence of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and the complex PTSD that I just talked about there. But we also explored suicidal ideation in adults as well. And we also looked at other crisis-related stressors, tried to identify what they were and what was maybe more associated with mental health outcomes in this population. And then study 2, we looked at the rates of parental mental health issues and maybe other associated child socio-emotional difficulties as well. We've completed those 2, and that's what we're going to present to you today. So I'm going to hand you over to Oisin, who's going to present the results of his studies. He's going to take over from me here and do that. Oisin, you okay there? And I can move the slides.
It's good, yeah. So the first study was on the mental health impact, just to adults living in defective concrete affected homes. So the methods first, we did an online survey between March and September of 24, and we collected data from about 400 adults living in these homes. And to assess mental health, we used a range of validated and widely used measures of mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD, complex PTSD, and suicidal ideation. And to understand which aspects of the crisis are associated with people's mental health, we gathered data on stressors sort of common to this crisis, like safety fears, relocating, financial stress, as well as socio-demographic information and people's trauma history. So the first finding was concerning was that 35.5% of people living in defective concrete affected homes have experienced suicidal ideation since this issue has arisen. It's striking that more than 1 in 3 people have experienced this in a short time frame, a matter of years, I think. For the other mental health conditions, 4.9% of people had PTSD, which is about twice as high as what you would expect to find in the Irish population. And again, complex PTSD that Karen spoke about was much more common. And again, that was about twice as high as the Irish population. And severe symptoms of depression was about 3 times as high as the Irish population and nearly 4 times as high for anxiety. So these are using the same measures and scoring criteria and stuff, and yeah, they're well beyond what you would be expected to find. So yeah, this can't explain this complex PTSD. The very high rates of that sort of support this as a chronic stressor, where people sort of feel trapped or there's no clear resolution, like with all issues with the scheme. It's been going on for years, like, and it'll take decades to resolve.
Yeah. And I think we were surprised. I know we said we hypothesized that the complex that's what the other term we kind of use is that kind of chronic toxic level of stress. We kind of predicted, we hypothesized that it would be, and this is what we found. We didn't expect the rates to be as high as they were, in terms of here, that 15.5% for complex PTSD, which is really, you can see here how high it is compared to the Irish general population using the same measure. People must understand that we're using the exact same measure. We also controlled for, if people need to understand this too, so we recognize that people may have had maybe a traumatic history before their experience of living in a home. We were able to control for that. So we held that to one side and only looked at people who were living in the crisis. And we also can explain it too, because people are feeling a sense of entrapment. They're feeling a sense of hopelessness, that there's no way out of this. And all of those, we know as psychologists, these are some of the key predictors of some of the trauma symptoms that we're explaining or highlighting here. So it made sense to us as psychologists why the rates could be as high as they are. So they do align with research on prolonged trauma exposure, and that was published by Highland in 27. So we're going to, Oisin will continue making some comparisons here with other types of trauma issues that can be experienced. Over to you, Oisin.
Yeah, just for illustrative purposes, we found that some of the rates of mental health problems were comparable to those seen following disasters or other types of large-scale traumatic events. And yeah, even
Yeah, so you'll see there that I mean, it's understand the 4.9 for PTSD. Yes, okay, you can see the people who are refugees or going through conflict. They're not necessarily as high, but if we look at the complex PTSD, which is 15.5, and compare it to others, you'll see how different it is. Sorry, there's someone calling me. Can you excuse me for a second? Oisin, can you continue there?
okay. I won't be able to change
Your
like
presenter, Oisin, but then you'll not be able to share. You'll still not be able to change them.
Maybe you could talk through the next slide, Oisin.
Yeah, I can talk for this. So for anxiety and depression, the same. You can see 26.2% of people and 30% of people for each of them. And in the next columns over, they're well above what you expect in the Irish or the international sort of general population. And then these trauma examples, they're all comparable in line with them, like and between like 20 and 30%. And yeah, so
Yeah. So
just
again, I suppose it was really highlighting just what we predicted. And again, Oisin, we had used the cutoff score of the higher severe end in these scores as well too. Sorry about that, folks, my disruption there, pardon me. Oisin, will we go on to the next slide?
yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk to this slide or?
Yeah, I can explain it. So the next part after sort of looking at how people's mental health was affected was understanding why or which aspects of living in a defective concrete affected home made people more likely to have these mental health conditions. And the strongest and most consistent was safety fears. So people who reported safety fears were nearly 5 times more likely to meet criteria for complex PTSD, over twice as likely to experience severe depression, and 3 times more likely to report suicidal ideation. And those with relocation-related stress were more likely to have severe anxiety, while financial stress also had large associations with all these outcomes.
Okay, so this links to, I suppose, a very, very well-known theoretical framework called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I remember presenting this at a conference in Letterkenny just before we began the study, because again, as a psychologist, I was trying to understand or wonder what might this do to people if they believe that their safety is at risk, their security and their safety in particular. And you can see from this particular theoretical framework that for any human being, your physiological needs, if you start at the bottom of the pyramid here, all human beings need physiological needs to be met: food, water, warmth, rest. The next level up from that, this is one of the basic needs, is safety. And they need to feel safe in their home. And if that's safety is compromised in any way, then the rest of the other psychological needs are impaired or impacted. And also their what they call their self-actualization. I know we're getting into big psychological terminologies here, but it's really, really important that people, parents, children, feel a sense of safety in the place that they live in. And that's what this really helps explain why one of the key predictors of everyone's outcomes here were their sense of safety was impaired, which again helped us understand that this makes sense, why we're seeing such high rates of complex PTSD in the sample. Some of the other qualitative, Oisin carried out some qualitative work as well, meaning he asked people to report in their own words. And some of the things that they were highlighting here, we can't present them all, we just picked out a few, was that this has a huge impact on our lives. It has actually taken over. It's all we talk about. It has been extremely stressful and it has ruined our lives. It is unable to sleep. People have extra money worries, and it's making me feel nervous around the reality that my home could collapse. So if you are experiencing this, it's not just something that happened across 1 week. This is something that's happening for people for months and years, and they're stuck in the same situation. So that explains why people's levels of complex trauma is so high. And it doesn't just end. So some of the other quotes are: fear of safety of visitors in own home. There's a large amount of plaster fell off the chimney, causing a lot of anxiety and distress. Life is consumed with the situation. There's no escape. We now live in a permanent state of save, save, save. Our money is no longer our own. And the impact on our lives is indescribable. I am missing out on my kids growing up due to the constant pain, yet we have no possible route to get out of this nightmare. So some people may think, but is there not like a supposed government grant scheme that's referred to as 100%? That has been presented, and I think we'll have a discussion about that at the end of our presentation, but that's not necessarily the case, and because people still require money up front to get on the scheme, to pay for a certain level of a build. Then they get it retrospectively paid back. But if you don't have the money at the beginning to build it up to a certain point, then people realize that they can't avail of it. And that's the issue. And this is the issue why people are saying they have had to save, 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 because they have had to possibly up front, maybe about 30,000, if not more, initially to get, yes, they may get it back, but they still don't have it in the first place to get on the scheme. So then, therefore, they stay stuck and trapped in the situation that they're in. We have another little video here. I'm just wondering if we have, it's now 1:35. Maybe if we get to the end of the presentation, we'll try and play it at that point, if that's okay. I just think we need to continue. So the study 2 then is on the impact on the children. And again, I'll just talk about the method, and Oisin's going to present to you briefly some of the outcomes. So this is again very important aspect of the study. It was online as well. There was 150 parents reported on the crisis and referred to questions about 268 of children. That's their own children. We used other measures again on the parents, similarly, the depression, anxiety, PTSD, and complex PTSD. And then we used a very reliable and valid, psychometrically valid tool called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, which looks at their children's mental health, their own children's emotional problems, conduct problems, hyperactivity, peer problems, and pro-social behaviour. And this is what the questionnaire asks the parent to complete on behalf of their child. We also wanted to determine if there was any defective concrete crisis related stressors like relocating, safety fears, financial stress that were impacting some of the outcomes. We looked at socio-demographic variables again, just to explore everything that could possibly be predicting some of the mental health rates. And we're going to present them to you now. So over to you, Oisin.
Yeah, it's, in terms of the parents, very high rates of mental health problems again. The complex PTSD and PTSD were broadly the same as the adult sample, whereas depression, anxiety were slightly higher, maybe 3 or 4% higher, but adults still very high.
Yeah.
And they reported on the well-being of their children. So this questionnaire, it gives 5 subscales of different areas where children's functioning they could have possible problems in. And their scores are categorized into either normal, borderline, or abnormal. And typically, this questionnaire is based off, you might expect to have 80% of people in normal, 10% in borderline, and 10% in abnormal. But, so we can see that broadly stays true for conduct and pro-social. But you can see some elevated problems in some of the other areas, like hyperactivity, which would be things like being very hyper and stuff, or peer problems, which would be about twice as high as what you might expect, which would be like social withdrawal or staying on their own, not making many friends. And the highest problem we saw in children was emotional problems. So that things like sadness or worry, and it's a good indicator of depression and anxiety. So that was nearly 40% of children had a probable issue in this area. And overall, total difficulties was over 1 in 4 children had a probable mental health problem. Yeah. So just to contextualize it a wee bit, I won't, there's a lot of data here, I won't go through it all, but we compared it to NI data because similar data wasn't available for the Republic of Ireland that goes through the whole age range. And if you just look over to the left hand side at total difficulties, again, with 26.5% of children had a probable mental health problem, whereas in the Northern Irish population, you'd only expect 11%. So that's about 2.5 times higher. And again, from emotional problems below that, it's almost 4 times higher than what you would expect in the general population.
I think if people are really interested in these slides, we'll be sharing this. You can scrutinize the different age groups. So the rest of the table looks at children between particular age bands, and it presents again, and every single one of them are highlighting that children who are experiencing and living through this defective concrete crisis are much, much higher whenever we compare the rates across all the age bands to Northern Ireland. Okay, Oisin.
Yeah. So in terms of why or which aspects affecting child's total difficulties, we found in terms of parental mental health, complex PTSD predicted children scoring in the borderline and the abnormal range, which made between 4 and 6 times more likely to have a problem. And it shows the severity of this chronic condition and possibly suggests an intergenerational transmission of traumatic stress. In terms of relating to the crisis again, safety fears was associated with child problems, showing just how unsafe people feel in these homes, and it's affecting the whole family, not just adults. Relocation was associated with lower odds, which might indicate people getting out of these unsafe homes, or yeah. And the strongest predictor we found was parental financial stress, which children of parents who reported this stress are having over 11-fold higher odds of having fall under that abnormal category. And this supports a wide range of literature showing the relationship between parental financial strain and child difficulties. And there's models like the family stress model, which sort of it is that the economic pressure that people experience from financial hardship or financial event that affects parents' mental health, affect their relationships, and just their ability to function, and ultimately can have effect on children because sort of systemic, and yeah.
So we're coming towards the end of our presentation, but I'm gonna finish off by talking about, well, what does it all mean? So the defective concrete crisis, what we have found in both studies, is very clearly having a family, community, system-wide serious negative impact socially and psychologically. And we believe that there's implications for intergenerational effects as well. So parents with elevated distress may have a reduced capacity to buffer their children from chronic stressors, and this can potentially impair their emotional availability and maybe their consistent caregiving, because they're trying to deal with constantly being feeling unsafe, feeling insecure in their own home, being hypervigilant, but also trying to navigate the financial pressure that they're being placed upon. The complex post-traumatic stress, complex trauma symptoms such as emotional dysregulation, and relational difficulties may disrupt the parent-child bonding again and increase household stress. So it's quite significant, and as psychologists, we're very concerned about it. In summary, just to state that we think a defining feature of the defective concrete crisis is its prolonged nature, inducing a chronic toxic type of stress, which is associated with the significant psychological distress for those affected. Our data is revealed very clearly, using very robust measures, the concerning levels of complex PTSD, PTSD itself, depression, anxiety, and unfortunately suicidality amongst affected homeowners, and particularly parents and children. And it's driven by the three main things: safety fears, living in structurally unsound homes, the relocation, displacement, where are we going to live? So even if some people have got their grant approved, they can't move out of their house for it to be demolished because they can't get somewhere else to live. So there's a lot of worries about that, but also having to pay for it up front. The severe financial strain that are linked to the shortfalls in the government remediation scheme. So again, we have been able to compare. We've been trying to be quite thorough. We've compared our data to global and natural disasters. And again, we are very concerned about the complex PTSD, safety fears, and financial stress of parents that are predicting the children's emotional difficulties as well. So the systemic impact on families and parents and children is really quite clear, and that we think we're looking at a public health crisis for those affected. So the financial pressure, just to give a little bit of insight here, and I think people in the audience might be able to explain this further. Under the current scheme, families still must pay up to 30,000 upfront and sometimes more before they're reimbursed. And this again excludes many low-income households. Most people must also continue their mortgage payments and upfront rent payments during the relocation, creating severe financial hardship. And those that are unable to participate remain in unsafe homes, facing chronic stress, entrapment, and hopelessness. And we know from as psychologists who've investigated this for years as a globally understood phenomenon, this is associated with suicidality. So the impact in terms of child, we think, and this is why I contacted Kira and spoke to Kira about it, we think that these conditions are closely reflect the key drivers of child poverty. And Kira was able to explain to me that housing, and there's 5 key factors. So I've put a tick on 4 out of the 5. Housing instability is a key driver of child poverty. Financial strain and income insecurity is a key driver of child poverty. Mental health impacts, we've just demonstrated them, they're quite serious. They are key drivers of child poverty, and educational opportunities as well. We think we've had some reports from young people who've put off going to college because their parents can't afford it. We can't speak to food deprivation, but we think there's definitely 3, if not 4, out of the 5 key drivers of child poverty that are happening here. So what can we do to help? We think, number 1, the government needs to accept the research evidence that this is a public health crisis. Therefore, they need to respond appropriately to stop and prevent further harm. And we're using the word harm here. The number 2 is, we think this is in our view as academics, but I think people in the audience here might be able to give more recommendations. But in our view, take practical action, remove people from the root source of the distress. So if you remove the need for upfront payments, most people don't have it to begin with. If you move people more quickly through the grant scheme, if you stop delays, barriers, unnecessary red tape that exacerbates level of distress. So all we kind of know, because we've looked and studied the predictors, that all of the mental health negative outcomes would cease immediately if steps 1 and 3 were acted upon. And 3, we think that there should be some guided interventions to support people who may be experiencing some of the more severe levels of complex mental health or trauma presentations, particularly for children and their parents. In our role as psychologists, we understand that involves more trauma-informed interventions. And we need more funding, significantly more funding, to help with family-focused trauma-informed interventions. Trauma-informed school-based support groups, supports multi-agencies are required. We want to prevent transgenerational cycles of trauma. And again, we're looking at the National Institute of Clinical and Care Excellence that recommend trauma-focused CBT and EMDR for those who are more severely impacted. Other research recommendations, we think that maybe examining the long-term physical implications of chronic enduring toxic stress. Oisin is about to do that. He has data that he's about to analyse. That's his 3rd paper that he's working on. The next slide really just talks about that. So we already know there's lots and lots of evidence about the long-term ongoing toxic stress has in physical health. There's a paper here. I'm not going to go into it, but it's called The Advances in the Molecular Neurobiology of Post-Traumatic Stress from a Global Context. So we know that there is literature already out there looking at this. We think examining the real financial pressure on families is needed more closely, like a real scrutiny of it. And we think that there has to be something done to try and prevent the transgenerational trauma impacts, particularly on focus coming at it from the angle of child poverty and long-term mental health issues. And we think we have some ideas that we want to work on to try and help it's called psychoeducation, but it's just to help children and young people understand what they're going through and try and help a bit more emotional literacy to cope with what's happening to them. So there we go, folks. That is the end, and I've only left you with a short bit of time for questions and answers, but I'm going to come back to you. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you so much, Karen and Oisin. And I'm not going to take up any time and leave the full 10 minutes that we have for any questions or comments that anybody might have. Just to kick us off, I see that there is one from Fiona in the chat who did have to leave. And basically, she's just wondering, I know Fiona works in the area of poverty. She works for the Trussell Trust, which is a food bank charity. And she was wondering if, people that